Hotter than hell. As many of you know, I actually completed the Hotter Than Hell 100 bicycle challenge beginning and ending in Wichita Falls, Texas in August of 2019. What many of you don't know is my backstory. On March 22nd of 2019, I came home from work and I had a full-blown stroke stemming from a blockage in my carotid artery. I guess a piece of gunk broke off from my artery walls, caused a blockage in my brain, causing excruciating pain and vomiting, and immediately left me completely paralyzed on the left side of my body. I remember the day like it was yesterday. I came home, I was really tired from work, and I said, I'm going to lay down and take a nap for a minute. And suddenly I had intense nausea. So I got up, I went to the bathroom that's off our bedroom and began to vomit and lost my lunch. I thought, boy, that's not, I must have picked up some bug or something at work. So I went to lay back down and the nausea came in again. I thought, that's weird. So I started to get up again thinking I'm going to go puke. But instead, um, I collapsed and found myself on the floor beside my bed. I called my wife. I said, Karen. So she came in and she couldn't get me off the floor. My daughter, who is now just finished her term of service in the Army, and when she was living at home and a homeschool student, she'd always watch all these YouTube videos on medical practice because she ended up doing an LPN and becoming a nurse in the Army. So proud of her. But anyway, she said, call 911, he's having a stroke. And I said, no, I'm just tired. I just need to rest. And she said, she looked me in the eye and she said, Dad, you're having a stroke? Shut up. She called 911, pulled out her phone, called 911. She was like 17 at the time. And suddenly an ambulance shows up with lights blazing, the whole bit. And I get like when EMSA shows up, you're like you're a hamster on a treadmill, like a piece of meat on a gurney. And boom, they put me in a stretcher and they rolled me out of the house. And boom, threw me in the back of an ambulance. I'm watching this thing like almost like in a third person. It's like, wow, it's like I'm watching a video. Anyway, they wheeled me up into ICU and they've got a cardiac response team there at St. Francis Hospital. And they put me in ICU and they started doing all kinds of tests and blood work and stuck an IV in my arm. And I'm sitting there going, look, guys, I'm tired from work. They said, sir, you've had a major cardiac event. Just relax and we'll look after you. Well, I didn't realize that little journey was going to be 8 days. And not just any 8 days. I felt like I was in a torture chamber because for the next 8 days, every 15 minutes, a nurse came in and said, Mr. Walsh, who's the president? What's your name? They asked me 4 or 5 questions and they wake me up. I'd try and lay back and go to sleep, but they wouldn't let me sleep every 15 minutes. And, after a couple of days, I finally snarked at the nurse. I said, man, listen, I know you're doing your job, but you keep pumping me full of drugs. And bottom line is, if I don't sleep, how am I going to heal? You're keeping me up. Why can't I just sleep? She said, Mr. Walsh, it's protocol. You have a blood clot in your brain. If you go to sleep, you will not wake up. We're saving your life. You just need to deal with it. And I'm sorry that it's uncomfortable, but, So for 8 days, my wife put a picture on Facebook that I'd had a stroke and I was in ICU. And suddenly you realize pretty quickly that there's no lone rangers in the kingdom of God. I've been serving Jesus with everything in me for a lot of years. And one by one, ministers and friends began to show up unannounced in my hospital room. And one of my friends, Colonel Larry Henderson, he came every single day over to my bed. And one night, about 2 a.m, in walks the great evangelist and my good friend of mine, Daniel King. And I said, Daniel, what are you doing here? I've been playing on my phone, watching all the social media, and he was doing a crusade in the Philippines. I said, I thought you were in the Philippines. He said, I was. I just got home, and I saw on Facebook that you'd had a stroke. And so I felt very strongly I was supposed to come in and pray with you because we all know God heals. I said, yeah, God's going to do miracles. I said, I got this. It's going to be all right. And he said, all right, well, let's pray. I thought, that's just the love of Jesus to send one of his prime servants who hadn't even been home to see his family yet. And he, had the taxi home from the airport, stop at the hospital so he could come up to my room and pray for me. I thought that was really honorable. And then there was another wonderful man, I don't remember his name, but he goes to a church here in Tulsa called Millennial, and he's a pastoral staff there, and he came in every single day to pray with me, and we stood on the Word and believed God. And there was a song by a worship team in California, in Redding, California, called Bethel, and the song is, I raise a hallelujah, heaven. Anyway, there's a line in the song. I put the song on repeat on my iPhone, and I kept listening to it. I raise a hallelujah. My weapon is a melody. I raise a hallelujah. Heaven comes to fight for me. Anyway, when that lyric in that song, heaven comes to fight for me, it was like I could feel like a surge of God's power going through my body. And I said, well, this too shall pass. I'll be all right. And but what I didn't know is the doctors were meeting with my wife. They weren't talking to me at that point. And when I learned that they were doing that, I said, hey, look, if you got a problem, you can talk to me. I'm still head of my house. He said, Mr. Walsh, you've suffered a severe thing. And as we talk about treatment, because the blood clot is in your brain and it could have a mental thing, your wife is your legal, what do you call it? There's a nice term for it. But anyway, she was the one that was having to make medical decisions for me while I'm laying there. Well, anyway, in came this wonderful, wonderful person. And we had prayed and believed God and trusted God for healing. But guess what? You may have believed God for healing, but God's quite willing and able to use doctors. People say, well, how can you say that? I mean, aren't you just going to trust God? Well, it's like the joke about the guy that, there was a flood and he cried out to God for help. And they sent a boat. The guy said, no, God's going to deliver me. And the boat went on. And then they sent a canoe. And the guy said, no, Jesus is going to help me. And they sent a helicopter when all his house was underwater. And the floodwaters came and swept him away and he drowned. And when he appeared before Jesus, he said, Jesus, why didn't you help me? He said, I did. I sent a boat, a canoe, and a helicopter, and you wouldn't have it. So here you are. So the same thing. Well, anyway, this guy from India, very sweet and precious doctor, his name is Dr. Panda, incredible cardiologist, incredible, brilliant man. He wasn't expecting that I would live. It didn't look good from his medical perspective. And I said, sir, do you believe in miracles? He said, well, we do the best we can. The bottom line was no, he didn't. And I said, well, you're about to see one. I said, because Jesus is going to raise me off this deathbed and I'm going to get back to work and life's going to be good. And he said, well, I hope so. But he was telling my wife, I'm not sure that he's going to make it through this. Well, when they done, when you have a stroke, like I said, you feel like a piece of meat on a gurney. They run you through MRIs, CT scans, blood work tests, ultrasounds. And it turned out that I had two problems. I had what they call a widowmaker. I had an aneurysm in my heart that was right at 5 centimeters. They said it could have killed me, but it didn't burst, thank God. And then I had a blood clot in my brain, and that was causing the paralysis. So he said, your carotid is mostly occluded, but there's a procedure we could attempt where we could insert a tube in your groin, fish it all the way through your body up to your neck, and could see if we could remove that blockage. I thought, well, let's do it. He said, you can't make that decision. He said, it's against the law in our medical practice because you realize, Mr. Walsh, that if something were to go wrong, you wouldn't make it through the procedure. You would die. I said, well, God's not going to kill me, and I trust you, Doc. You can do this. And he said, well, we have to have a conference with your wife. So she came in, and she said, what do you think? I said, I think it needs to be done. She said, and he said, you realize this is the equivalent of brain surgery? And she said, he's needed his brain worked on for years. That's the funny thing about, when you've been married a long time, you just tell it like it is, and you need a sense of humor. But anyway, so The part that I didn't quite understand, though, was that I was going to have to be awake to this procedure. So the next morning, they wheel me into surgery, and I'm laying there. I'm laying on this gurney, and up above my head is a TV screen that's, probably 6 or 8 feet long, as my body. And I'm watching them poke this tube with this funny little 3-finger thing for sucking blood clots. And they poke this thing, and I'm watching, and I'm feeling this kind of tickles as they're going through my body. And it goes up into my neck, goes right up into my neck, goes right up into my head. Thinking, that's pretty weird. And then all of a sudden, Dr. Pandev goes, I got it. And he starts wheeling out this, 6 feet of tube, just pulling it out of my body through my groin. I'm thinking, that's pretty weird. But anyway, he reaches over and he takes the end of it. It's got a little red dot, which I put a picture of on there. And he wipes it on a little piece of Kleenex. He's about to pick it up, throw it out. I said, hold it, Doc. When he did that, suddenly I felt a rush like pins and needles. If you ever slept on your hand or something and falls asleep, comes awake, pins and needles. I could feel feeling happen in my left hand. I'm like, hey, Doc, look. And I could move my fingers. And it wasn't much, and it was weak, but I could still move them. And I said, is that a good thing? And he said, yeah, that's a very good thing. And I could wiggle my toes. So I had some feeling in my left side, which I had not had. I hadn't been able to move it, just laid there limp, unable to do anything. And I was pretty excited about it. Well, he had told my wife that, I was probably going to die through the procedure. But in any case, because of the position of the blood clot, that I was not going to be able to walk for at least 18 months, if I was able to walk at all, but did not have great expectations. Well, I'm sure glad he didn't tell me that, because I've got great expectations, and I'm like, greater is he that's in me than he that's in the world. And I like to tease doctors, because on the good side of it, I'm sold out for Jesus, and Jesus himself had a doctor on staff, Dr. Luke. So I said, if Jesus walked around, he had a doctor on staff, it's good that you can walk with Jesus, and I believe that God's got some great disciples in the medical profession. Thank God for them. I said, but there's a reason that they call this medical practice. I said, because you guys are only practicing, but my God, he heals. And they said, what do you... It's funny, I was doing my Bible reading this morning, and there's a story in there about an Israelite king named Hezekiah, and he'd done something stupid, not that we all have. And Isaiah the prophet comes to him and says, set your house in order because you're going to die. And Hezekiah was like, man, God's going to end my life. Cries out to God. He said, God, please have mercy, forgive me. And in fact, I had so many people praying for me. There's one friend of mine in Israel, Rabbi Moshe Rothschild. And I'm texting back. I got nothing better to do. I'm on my phone. I won't let me sleep, so I'm just texting everybody and talking on social media. So I asked Rabbi Moshe for prayer. And I said, I'm a Christian, and I believe that Jesus took stripes in his body that our body be healed. So I believe in divine healing. And I said, what's the Jewish perspective on healing? He said, Chris, we believe that if you find yourself in intensive care like you have, when you're laying on your back, there's only one place to look, but that's up. We consider it in our tradition a time where an individual needs to do very deep soul searching. And during that 8 days, I did. I went through every possible sin, and there's two kinds of sins. There's the things that you did that were wrong, and then there's the things that you should have done. Well, I like the way one theologian says, there's sins of commission, that's the stuff you did, and then there's sins of omission, the things, good things that you should have done but you didn't. And just ask God to forgive me for, just not being a perfect dad and a good husband. Just God to have mercy upon me. And he heard and he answered. And he did have mercy upon me, and he healed me. But what's interesting is, I'm getting into some pretty deep theology here in a minute, but hey, if you're at death's door and either God moves or you're going to die, well, you might need to readjust your theology. But there's another story. I'm trying to remember which king. I was reading about him this morning. Might have been Hezekiah again, but anyway, here's what happened. What happened is he told him that you're going to die, and he cried out to God, and then the prophet that had just delivered the word that said he's going to die, God speaks to the prophet again and says, turn around and tell him, I've seen his tears and his humility, and I've chosen to forgive him. Tell him that I've given him 15 more years to his life. He was an old man at that point. Hey, 15 years sounds like a pretty good thing. And he goes, wow, thank God. I'm going to live and not die. Well, right after that, he tells Isaiah, go to the physicians, and they took a poultice of some sort of figs, and they made an ointment out of it, and they applied it to whatever cancer or whatever was on the king, and he was totally healed. But here's the point I want to make about all that. It wasn't the ointment that healed him. It was God. But God used doctors to heal him. So here's the thought. When we're facing a life or death medical condition, and we cry out to God, and we get right with God. Now, I'm not saying that every sickness is because of sin. Just there's a devil, and there's just evil in the system, and just hard things that can happen. But anyway, in this particular case, but notice the way that worked. The guy cried out to God. God said, I will heal you. And then God gave a medical practitioner an ointment that cured whatever sickness that this guy had. So it's the same thing with us. When we cry out to God, we should cry out to God in faith, go to Jesus and believe that he is. Back to my little joke with the doctors. I said, you guys are medical practitioners because you're only practicing. I said, but the Jesus that I serve, he ain't practicing. He heals. So anyway, in the Bible story that I read, I'm trying to remember where it was, but anyway, it's a good story. You can look it up. But just look up the poultice of figs and you'll find it. But anyway, only after the guy had prayed and asked God for healing, and God had said he was going to heal him, did God give the doctors the medical prescription that was needed in order to facilitate the healing that God had already promised the king. So anyway, I really believe that the divine order of things, that we need to go to God first. Anyway, the very next day, where they told me I'd never walk again. Now, I was still weak as a kid, I got to admit. That night, because the blood clot was gone, they actually let me sleep. Wow. Slept like 10 hours. It was so good. I'd been up off and on for almost 8 days at that point. I was just like that, But anyway, next morning I got my little gown on. First thing I did is I got up, got out of bed, and they'd taken the IV out, I guess when I was sleeping or whatever. And so I got up and tried to put some weight on my feet. And I realized that, hey, I can feel my feet. I can walk. And so I got my gown and tried to tuck my posterior parts in behind so I wasn't doing the streak and mooning everybody when I'm walking down the hall. And but first thing I did is I got out and I just started walking. And the nurses looked like they'd seen a ghost. They said, Mr. Walsh, what are you doing out of bed? You're not able to walk. I said, well, I guess I forgot. Here I am. I'm walking. And I'd walk up to the little visitor area, and my friend Colonel Larry was there, and we'd just sit there and have coffee and chat and talk. And then I'd try and tie up the back of those little hospital gowns. And they always leave like your butt hanging out, showing for everything for the sun to shine. And I'm like, that's just, anyway. But the point is, I was able to walk. And after a couple more days, they didn't just move me to a regular care unit. They discharged me and I got to go home. But my wife tells me I was not the same person that came home. For the next 2 months, I slept a lot of times 12, 14 hours a day. I was just so tired. And they had me on these rosuvastatin and lisinopril and baby aspirin, I think, were the 3 prescribed meds. But man, the statin drugs, man, they made me drunk as a skunk. And I started to go back to work, and I'd be walking like a drunk man. And I was a construction manager, and you just can't be walking around a construction site, high as a kite, or woozy on these meds. So finally, after a couple of weeks of this, I had an incident where I'd gone to work and I came home at noon for lunch, and I was just exhausted and I hadn't done anything really hard, just walking around the job site in the morning. But man, I was just so fried. I said to my wife, she was cooking me some lunch, and I said, I'm just going to lay down for a minute and make sure you kick me when lunch is ready, and I'll get back to work. So anyway, I lay down. That was at noon. I woke up. It was like I'd been fallen into a deep, deep sleep. I woke up. I was just like woozy again. I said, what time is it? I gotta get back to work. She said, it's 4:30. Work is over. She said, I called your boss. I let you sleep. And I got angry. I said, this ain't right. If these meds, and I started to become very, what's the word? Bold, if not arrogant, but bold when it came to doctors. If you allow yourself, now there's a lot of great doctors that actually practice medicine with the intention of getting you healed. But a lot of them, they get paid for every lab test you go to, every CT scan, every MRI, every ultrasound. They're collecting a fee for all of that. And it's all going on your insurance. The funny thing about that was I got my bill. I think we were on government assisted Medicaid or whatever it was, Sooner Health or whatever. And anyway, I got the bill from the hospital for the 8 days that I was there. It was $256,000. And I didn't have $256, period. And they said, you can pay. I thought, well, who would write a letter like this? It was a nice letter, but it said, you have a choice. You can either pay the $256,000 for the treatment you received, or you can co-pay with our insurance $50. I said to my wife, I said, I think we ought to come up with $50. She said, why? I said, well, I either pay them $50 copay or $256,000. I said, I think we probably ought to pay the copay. So anyway, we immediately paid the $50, and that was it. Medical bills were paid. To God be the glory on that. When God heals, he doesn't leave you in debt for the rest of your life. But anyway, I finally went in with this bag of tricks and all the pills that they had me on. And I went in and I said to the doctor, at that point they moved me over to St. John's, Dr. Taubman, who's supposed to be a great cardiologist. I really like Dr. Taubman. He's a nice guy. But I went in and talked to his nurse, and I said, look, these are the meds that you guys got me on, and I can't do it. It's not working. I mean, I'm falling down like a drunk man at work. And she looked, and she went through, I had a Walmart sack full of all these pill bottles, and I laid them on her desk. She looked at them and looked at what it said on each bottle, take at 2 in the morning or 2. She said, well, here's the problem. I said, what's the problem? She said, I'm amazed that you're alive. I said, well, a lot of people have said that. And she said, no. She said, this Reservostatin, you're supposed to take one. What happened is that Dr. Taubman prescribed it for you, and your family physician prescribed the same thing when he looked at your hospital report. And so you've been taking a double dosage of it, and it might have killed you. I said, well, is that why I've been so drunk? So I reduced my dosage down to regular. And after, I don't advise everybody to do this, but after a week or two, I found that I was fine in the morning. I'd get up and have my coffee and get ready to go for the day. And then I'd take those statin drugs. Lisinopril didn't have such a heavy kick to it, but that Reservostatin sure did. Anyway, I'd take the pills in the morning, and within 20 minutes, I'm woozy and drunk and just tired and just numb. And I said, this ain't going to work. So after a week or two, I went over to the kitchen, got the water running, and just ran them down the garbage disposal and crunched them up and said, through the bottle and the thing, I said, I'm not taking them anymore. So anyway, I got in an argument with the doctor, said, you have to take them. This is the protocol. You'll be dead in 6 months. And I said, sir, listen, God's just raised me off a deathbed. And I don't remember recalling ever that there was an election in heaven where God uh, was voted out off his throne and he handed that position to you. I said, I'm going to live and not die and declare the glory of God. And I said, these meds have been doing me more harm than good. Eventually, a friend of mine who's we since COVID came and all that, we became vitamin junkies and we took different vitamins. Well, there's a vitamin called moringa. I take a couple tablets of that. But here's the problem. Most of the meds will treat symptoms but don't treat cause. And that's what I'd always ask doctors. Like I said, I became a redneck. It's like, okay, I appreciate this test and this treatment, but what will that do to contribute to my health and healing? Well, this is just standard procedure, Mr. No, I don't want standard procedure. I want you to answer my question. What will this do to contribute to my health and healing? What are the medical implications of taking this pill or that pill or going for that test? What will that do to help me? And I got in a couple cases some pretty heated arguments with some of these doctors. Well, anyway, God's got a sense of humor, and so do I. But eventually I stopped taking all the meds. I substituted moringa tablets for lisinopril, and lo and behold, my blood pressure is 120/80, and I'm off all meds. To God be the glory. But we're going to talk about hotter than hell and how that contributed. I've told a little bit about the stroke. Now, I've been starting to ride my bike as part of my weekly training, and I've been working out at the gym with a guy that was actively serving active duty in the Marine Corps, and he'd just been deployed to San Diego. So he wanted to go back on base strong. So him and I trained for a thing called 1,000-pound challenge. For all you bodybuilders, strength trainers, you know exactly what it is. You got to do 3 lifts, deadlift, squat, and bench press in that order. And then your combined weight lifted has to break 1,000 pounds. So we're training, going heavier every week and going for it. And it's a bit of a joke when you go 1 rep max on any lift. It's like, okay, what color's the wall? Might have been started off as a white wall, but if you do a powerlifting, it's like, wow, rainbow. People don't need to do drugs; they just need to powerlift. But anyway, as part of the thing, the doctor said, look, increased blood pressure when you do a heavy lift has a 100% chance of rupturing this aneurysm in your heart. And that's a widowmaker. And what will happen is, it's your aorta or whatever, and all the blood will explode into your chest cavity, and you'll be dead before EMSA can get to you. And I thought, well, okay, I might ought to listen a little bit. So I said, well, what can I do? He said, we can walk a little bit. And I said to the doctor, I said, well, can I ride my bicycle? And he said, yeah, riding your bike around the block might be a good thing. I said, well, what he didn't know is the guy I worked for had bought me a road bike, and he was a competitive cyclist. And I'd been going out on Wednesday nights for a thing called Wednesday Night Ride. It's a 28-mile loop up through the hills in Sand Springs. And guys just hammer, push. And so I decided that, and there's a group, cycling is almost a religion here in Tulsa. There's a lot of really good, strong cyclists. There's a group on Facebook called Fast Old Guys and Gals, and every person that's in that group is some sort of cardiac, heart, or stroke survivor. So they use cycling as rehab. So I thought that'd be a good group to get involved with. So I called the leader of the band, the guy that had a pacemaker, Bill Titano. And I'd been out of the hospital like maybe he said, why don't we meet over at Jenks Bridge and we'll just ride down Riverside for a while and just get you back on the bike. And I said, all right. So we ride down Riverside. We get past 101st, for those of you that know Tulsa. We started riding out into the country. I thought, well, I wonder where he's going to turn around. Thought we might go as far as Memorial. And then he turns down, I think, Harvard and starts riding south. And now we're out in the country. And there's probably about 30 other cyclists, and they're all talking. Remember, I've just been out of ICU a little more than a week. And we ride. And anyway, we're puttering along, huffing and puffing, and drinking lots of water, a nice warm morning. And after a while, my left side starts cramping up, and I'm thinking, I don't want to die out here on this bike. And a couple people were trying to get me to pick up the pace and stay with it. I said, I'm getting pretty tired. So I finally, rode up, accelerated a bit, caught up with Bill. And I said, Bill, I'm feeling pretty tired. I just got out of the hospital. How far are you guys planning on riding? He said, oh yeah, I forgot about you, Chris. He said, we're probably going to go around Liberty Mounds. Most of the guys want to get 60, 70 miles in today. I'm thinking 60, 70 miles. I was thinking like 2 or 3 miles down Riverside. And he said, you might want to hop off over here at Hectorville. I'm thinking Hectorville. He said, it's only a couple miles up. Well, a couple miles to him, it was 10 miles up. So anyway, got up to Hectorville. And then all of us that ride, usually turn on our cell phone. There's an app called Strava. It tells you how fast you're going and how many miles. Well, anyway, to make a really long story short, I started cramping up, so I pulled over, went to the corner store, drank a V8, drank lots of water, called my wife. I said, I'll tell you what, I'll start riding up Elwood, and maybe you could come meet me in the Jeep and pick me up. And she said, okay. So she decides she's going to come. Well, I'm riding up, and I got up beside a ranch, and this guy had a huge friggin' dog, a bull mastiff. This dog came running out, charging at me. I'm on my bicycle, and I'm thinking, what am I going to do here? That dog is wanting to eat me. So I was too tired. I couldn't sprint and outrun the dog. And the dog had got himself right in the middle of the road. I mean, if I'd had a pistol, boom, that would have been it for that dog. I would have killed it in a heartbeat. But anyway, you can tell when a dog's just barking and making noise, or when his hair's up, he's quiet, growling, and that dog wanted to eat me. So he got himself in the middle of the road. It's like, thou shalt not pass. And then he would charge me. And by that point, I unclipped from the pedals on my bike. I got off my bike, and I'm using my bike to fend them off. And so we have this standoff in the middle of the road. I'm sitting there on my bike, and this bull mastiff is growling at me, his hair up, and he just would not let me go. And then my left side was still kind of twinging and stuff. I'm thinking, this sucks. And it was starting to get hot. Well, eventually, 15 minutes or so later, this dog, and he just wouldn't stop. He's just there in the middle of the road. Thou shalt not pass. Anyway, my wife finally pulled up with the Jeep. She saw the dog. She beeped the horn, and the dog charged the Jeep. I'm like, this dog is mean. Anyway, she pulled up beside me, and it came charging at me. She had to push the dog off the road with the Jeep. Now, she didn't run it over, but, she had to bump him gently until he finally went up the driveway, barking and growling, still turning around every couple minutes, charging back, wanting to bite somebody. We finally got the Jeep open, got my bike in. Well, I looked at my iPhone on Strava. I'd ridden 38 miles that day. I'm like, wow. For a guy that was supposed to die last week, was not supposed to walk for 18 months, to ride 38 miles with a bunch of crazy cyclists was, I thought, pretty amazing. All doped up on meds. But anyway, as time went on, I started a training log. I said, I should start cycling. So there's a 20-mile loop on Riverside. Anybody that lives here in Tulsa knows exactly what I'm talking about. If you ride from 71st and Riverside, which is the main intersection, it doesn't matter which side of the river you go. You can either go the east or west side, take the bike path downtown to 11th Street Bridge and back. It's 19.6 miles. We call it a 20-mile loop. Or you can ride down to Jenks and get it just over 20 miles. So I would get off work and I'd get home about 4:30, quarter to 5, and I'd grab myself, a glass of juice or banana or something. I'd hop on my bike and hit on the computer, and away I'd go. I thought, it only takes about an hour now. Well, 20 miles took me about an hour and 30 minutes. But, be home by 6:30, still light out, and put your bike up and rest a little bit, and then time to eat some supper and get ready for bed. So I got into the system of that. And I got to the point where, we do Wednesday night ride, and then I set a goal. My goal was, what would be awesome to me, because the Wednesday night ride, at that time my fitness level I was only about 14, 15 miles an hour, which for a cyclist is pretty mediocre, to be honest. And the group rides were typically not less than 16 miles an hour, but usually they were right around 18, 19 miles an hour. And I couldn't keep up with the group. I mean, you huff and puff and keep up for a mile or so, but you know, and my boss was there. And anyway, I used to do the Wednesday night ride, and I realized that my goal would be if I could just finish the 28-mile loop and finish it with the group, which, like I said, they were about an 18-mile-an-hour average, I would think that I'd hung the moon. For somebody that wasn't supposed to walk again, do 28 miles at 18 miles an hour, boy, that's awesome. Well, to make, again, a long story short, I was disciplined week in, week out, week in, week out. Well, right around the 1st of July in 2019, we did the Wednesday night ride. And usually what happens is the last section on Avery Road, everybody kind of opens up, puts their foot on the gas, and sprints the last 3 to 5 miles back to the parking lot. And then we have a tailgate party. We all sit back and drink water and talk about how great we were. And it was a lot of fun. But anyway, this particular Wednesday night, I not only was able to keep up with the group, but when everybody sprinted at the finish, I was able to sprint by everybody, and I was so excited. I thought, this is pretty awesome. I was pretty ecstatic because so many times the group had left me out in the middle of the wilderness. And so anyway, when we got back to the parking lot, everybody was talking, got out of their lawn chairs. One of the guys said, Chris, you rode very strong tonight. How'd you get so fit and get so fast? I said, fear and loneliness. They said, fear and loneliness. I said, what do you mean? I said, well, so many times I didn't know the route where you guys were riding, and we get out there, and I didn't know the way back, and you guys take off, and I'd be left out in the middle of the highway. And I'd have to ride back several miles. I had a little bike light in my bag. And, it was pretty scary. Cars go flying by, and you're riding down a dark highway. You don't know where you're going. You got just a little headlamp on your bike. And it's a lot harder to ride on your own than with a group, because with a group, somebody's breaking the wind and giving you help. But anyway, I said, so fear and loneliness. It's been so lonely riding back alone. And I was scared a lot of times riding back in the dark because it took me so long to finish the route. What took them, like an hour and a half, an hour and 45 minutes would take me sometimes 3 or 4 hours. And by that time, the sun had set and it was dark. And anyway, so while we're sitting there, and he said, well, that's great. You completed the Wednesday night ride. So what's your next goal? I said, I don't know. I really hadn't thought much about it. They said, well, you got to do a century. Got to do a Hondo. I said, yeah. And I said, what's a Hondo? They said, well, it's 100 miles. I said, well, I've started keeping a training log, and with the rides that I do after work, I said I've been averaging about 100 miles a week. And one guy said, 100 miles a week? No, it's 100 miles in one day. I said, and I was just dumbfounded. I thought, 100 miles in one day? Is that possible? Like I said, the longest ride that I'd done, I think, was 38 miles on the Hectorville pain. And I remember the pain of cramping up. I thought, I don't want to do it. And they said, yeah, actually, there's a training group, and there's an event coming up here next month. It's really well supported. It's called Hotter Than Hell 100. It's fairly flat. There's no big mountains in it. I think you should do it. So I went and looked online. The entry fee was pretty cheap, and I signed up. So, well, now I'm committed. I signed up. And then somebody told me about a training group that met 7 o'clock on Sunday morning. Well, remember, I'm a sold out for the Lord Christian, and I wasn't going to skip my church time. So this church had services on Saturday night, so I started going to Saturday night services so I could get up at 6 o'clock and get ready and drive down to where these guys met at what used to be called the Blue Rose Cafe at 21st and Riverside. And we would meet down there, and then we'd talk about planning for doing long rides. Like we rode we did Hectorville, I think, the first time, and then we went around Liberty Mounds the next time. So the first ride I did with that group is we did 67 miles at a 16-mile-an-hour pace, which it's a pretty worthy event. But everybody was so supportive and encouraging, and um, anyway, I was so impressed with the group. And then finally, by the second, so that was the first week of July. So throughout July, each week we would go a little further, and then we did this ride out around Morris, Oklahoma, near Okmulgee. And by the time we rode back to our vehicles at 21st and Riverside, the computer said we'd done 87 miles, and it was 103 degrees in the day we did it. And we're all taking turns and drinking lots of water, and learned a whole lot about endurance cycling. I mean, you can't just ride in that heat and think you're going to be okay. You have to drink electrolytes. I've learned there's that kid stuff, Pedialyte. You put that in your water bottle, and that really helps. Otherwise, you start cramping up because you're sweating out so much salt and stuff that, anyway. So, but we had done we did this 87-mile ride, and I said, well, if I can do 87 miles with a group, we can do 100. So we're all texting back and forth, and we made a decision that we would ride together on Hotter Than Hell. There was 7 of us. And now, you got to remember, along the way, I had to recalibrate my entire life. My left side was initially so weak that when I went to the gym to try and do weights, I began my arm curls with 2 to 5 pound dumbbells. When I tried bench press, just a 45-pound bar was maximum effort. No strength on my left side, so the bar just kept boom. Now, after a couple months of consistent effort, I finally managed to get my bench press back to 185 with my warrior son spotting for me. What had happened was, I've been training with, power lifters and weightlifters, and, like to be one of the strongest guys in the gym, and rah, rah, rah. There's not a lot of guys in a regular gym that are benching 315. But, anyway, after that happened, my son, who was 14 at the time, I started working out with him. And it was amazing. Well, there were some things that happened along the way. Remember, I had believed God for my healing, and I was trusting Jesus every day to be able to make it through the schedule of the day and be able to work out and get back strong in the Lord and the power of His might. And but people of the making of supplements, there's no end. Somebody told me we had a Bible study that I led on Tuesday mornings for leaders. There was a guy there that was from the nation of Belize, had been on staff at Victory Christian Center for a long time. Jacob Dewitt, God bless Jacob, who's a Mennonite, and he takes a ton of vitamins, and he knows a whole lot about supplements. And anyway, he was into some thing called Melaleuca. So I was able to purchase from him a product, through him, he bought it for me, called Peak Performance, made by Melaleuca, and it's a 2-a-day vitamin pack. You take one in the morning and another one. So I bought a month's supply to check it out, and I realized that this product was really good. Helped me have enough energy to get through my day. One pouch at breakfast, another before bed. I took those for 2 months, and they really did help. And then I had another friend, that's one of these multi-level gurus on, what's the company, Kangen Water. And he said, look, with all the training you're doing, you need this alkaline ionized water to really help you. So I'll tell you what, Chris, you come over to my house as often as you want, and I've got a Kangen machine, and I'll load it up. You can get water for the week. So I went over there and had these little water bags. Put a picture of them here in the little article, and started drinking Kangen water in my water bottle. So the stuff worked, and I made a decision that I wanted to buy one of those Kangen machines. But then when I looked at the price tag, they were over $5,000, and I thought, man, that's a lot of money for water. Well, I ended up purchasing the Life Ionizer 7700, which is another ionized alkaline water thing. Well, it's much cheaper. I bought the machine at an eBay auction for like $500, but uh, it has. I think it's better than Kangen, the quality of the water, because it has two ceramic filters that take all the impurities of the city water. But the problem is those filters have got to be changed every 6 months, and they're about $200 a pop. So anyway, it's been sitting on the shelf now for about a year because we just haven't used it. Um, but anyway, back to the Hotter Than Hell 100, which is the whole topic of this talk. We made a decision that we were going to ride Hotter Than Hell together, and if we got separated, we planned that there was checkpoints at the 30 mile, 60 mile, and 90 mile checkpoints. So sure enough, at 30 miles, we re-met and regrouped and ate a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and away we went. And each morning, I was praying God's healing promises. There's a little booklet by Charles Capps called his Healing Confessions. And so I began to confess God's word every day. And anyway, in the blog, I put a link so that you can actually get the healing prayers. Ultimately, God is a giver of life, and he's got to be first place in our life. Daily, I begin all of my days with my daily Bible reading, the 1 Year Bible Online, seeking first Jesus and his will for my life each day. Now, if you don't know Jesus yet, none of this is going to work, because this is not a formula. It's a relationship with the living God. But anyway, go ahead and read the article on how to get to know Jesus. Anyway, let's talk about the event. When we got to Wichita Falls the night before the event, I couldn't even sleep. I was scared, and I told God I didn't want to die attempting this event. That I was scared of the extreme heat that this event was named after. In speaking with successful finishers from previous events, I learned that the rule was you had to make it through the checkpoint at the 60-mile mark that had the name the Gate of Hell. Or race organizers, if you didn't make it through in a certain time standing, they'd reroute you on a shorter course. I prayed that God would protect me from the heat, and he gave me a deep peace. I slept deeply for 5 hours or so before we had to get up. So race morning dawned, my alarm went off at 5 a.m. Quickly jumped in the Jeep to get over to the Coliseum for the prepaid breakfast. We'd come in late the night before, and we missed the Spaghetti Fest, but we found a Mexican restaurant open and had some great enchiladas. But I knew that 100 miles was farther than I'd ever ridden before, and I needed to eat to get some gas in the tank. Rules of riding the heat. Eat before you get hungry. Drink continually before you are thirsty. Do not stop for too long at rest stops. It's too hard to get going again. Set a steady pace that's comfortable, not too fast at first, or you have no gas for the last 10 miles, which are notoriously hot and hard. After a wonderful breakfast, we hurried to the bike check-in, where I grabbed my trusty steed, began to meander to the starting gate. Stopped at a bike truck, got air in my tires, and it was time to go. Incredible start. They played the national anthem. Jets from Shepherd's Air Force Base did a flyby before the cannon went off and sent a sea of cyclists off. From what I understand, I got put a picture in there. There's 8,900 people on bikes. Wow, that's a lot of folks. Anyway, amazingly, the air temperature was only 68 degrees Fahrenheit at start time. So I was determined to make good time before the inevitable heat, which the race was named. In training, we only averaged 15 to 16 miles per hour. For the first 30 miles, I rode easily between 19 and 21 miles per hour. Why? Because 8,900 cyclists create like a vortex of wind, and you get behind them and you just get sucked along in the crowd. It was wonderful. Incredible event. Police block every intersection allowing cyclists, all 8,900 of us, to roll through every intersection. There's a great opportunity to draft and allow other stronger riders to act as bulldozers for you into the wind. Before I knew it, we hit the 30-mile-an-hour checkpoint and easily found our Tulsa group of 7 riders, which were about to become my lifelong friends. We blasted through the 60-mile Gate of Hell, where they have a huge inflatable gorilla in the middle of the road, and he's got, like a loincloth that has this banner called the Gate of Hell. Well, I talked to one of the race officials, and I said, what's with the gorilla and the Gate of Hell? And the race official said, well, that's Pyro Pete. He's a bit of a legend down here, because we're the largest century bike ride in America. I said, okay, well, what's the deal with this Gate of Hell? He said, well, you've just ridden 60 miles, and typically you've ridden from west to east, because that's the way the course is laid out. He said, but typically the prevailing winds uh, go from west to east. So you had the wind behind you and you've been pushed along and you've started in the cool of the day. So it's fairly cool. But now, as soon as you turn here, you start riding back into Wichita Falls. And he said, there's no shade. And, it's right now at 100 degrees. And this race is not called Hotter Than Hell 100 for nothing. I thought, wow. I was talking to another guy at the thing, and he was a Christian, and we got talking. And when he said that, I was pretty discouraged because, we'd just ridden 60 miles. It's a fairly good piece. And I prayed. I said, God, I'd asked you last night, I don't want to die in this event. Help me. And just as clear as we're sitting here, I had a scripture just bubble up on the inside of me. That's why it's so important to be full of the Word of God. Jesus said, I will build my church and the gate of hell will not prevail against it. Well, that was talking about the revelation that God gave to Peter to start the church. I get all that. But in that moment, Jesus was saying, this gate of hell, this discouragement, this thing is not going to stop you, Chris. Ride on. So anyway, I got back on my bike and found our group and we started down. Well, as soon as we left the 60-mile checkpoint, when you turn back into Wichita Falls, now you got the wind in your face, 100 degrees. It's like riding into a blast furnace. It was very hot and very discouraging because, we've been clipping along 16, 17, 18, even bursts up to 20 miles an hour. And now you turn back into the wind. I'm looking at the speedometer and we're doing like 8, 10 miles an hour. I'm like, oh God, this sucks. And it really did suck. It was hard. But like that old country song, you find out who your friends are. What happened is because we had trained together, we knew how to ride in a pace line where we would work an echelon where we'd take turns taking the wind. And so one person would, you ride up to the front and then you let off the gas and you coast back and you rest a little bit. And then the next person comes alongside you and they ride up and then they coast back. The next person rides up, coast back. And so when you work a pace line like that, suddenly I look and sure enough, we're back doing 14, 15, pretty soon 16 miles an hour go in the wind. And I have a good friend who I don't see as often as I'd like to, but he's a Mohawk warrior and he's a worship leader. His name is Jonathan Miracle, and he has a band called Broken Walls. Anyway, he's written a song that's just, it's called Ride the Wind. Warrior, come on and ride the wind. Well, I didn't have a CD player, or, might have brought it. Music would have been good. But anyway, as I began to get into the wind and got our blood flowing again, that song just like hit repeat in my brain. Thank God for Jonathan Miracle and for that song. Warrior, come on and ride the wind. Anyway, so it was like the wind was in our face and just this savage passion just rose up and it was like, no, I'm not going to die here. I'm going to win this thing. And sure enough, we got to the 80-mile checkpoint. Well, I learned some things about life in 80 miles. It was very hot. And they had a ice bucket challenge where they took a dump truck and they took one of those kiddie pools about 4 foot tall. The dump truck dumped ice in it and they filled it up with water. And anybody that was crazy enough to jump in that pool, they gave them a free T-shirt. Well, I'm like, I ain't doing that. I don't want to take a chance of cramping. But anyway, it was kind of a funny thing. You go into the tent for the checkpoint. Normally they're handing you out water and Gatorade. And I love the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Those were just manna from heaven for me. At some of them, the community would come out and they put on all you could eat Mexican fajita bar. I'm like, how could anybody eat that and then get back on the bike and ride? I said, I'm not touching that. But anyway, they had like it looked like an alcohol bar and had these little shot glasses full of some liquid. And I said to the guy that was kind of dressed up like a bartender, I said, what's this all about? I said, I don't drink alcohol. I don't think it's real wise 80 miles into a 100-mile ride. He said, that's not alcohol, that's pickle juice. He said, get yourself a shot. I thought to myself, pickle juice? So I walked over there and grabbed a little shot glass and bam, drank this pickle juice. Now, pure pickle juice kind of tastes nasty. But when you're so dehydrated and so exhausted and 80 miles into a 100-mile run, whatever's in pickle juice, all the electrolytes and whatever's in it, it's like you just, I don't know how to describe it. It just felt like a rush of life just going through, went all the way into my body and went all the way down into my legs. And it was like, whew, that was pretty good. Give me a glass of water, take some water to wash the nasty taste out. I said, give me another one of those. Bam. I drank 2 or 3 of them. It was like, man, pickle juice. Who would have thought pickle juice could be so good? But on a hot day when you're sweating and hard, and then you get back on the bike and they had little signs, Strava, which is the big cycling app that you get on your phone. It said, this is the Strava Pickle Juice Challenge, this segment. So you ride another 10 miles. Well, anyway, an interesting encounter happened. The jerseys, you could buy a jersey from the event. And, Hotter Than Hell 100 was pretty cool. I didn't have money to buy one. So anyway, on the back, it had a little slogan that said, don't mess with Texas. There's always been a rivalry between Oklahoma and Texas. Well, all the people that had organized our training rides had said, whatever you do, make sure that you wear a jersey or something that says Oklahoma. I didn't know why, but I was about to find out. Remember, we're at 80 miles now. So the 6 or 7 of us join up and the wind's howling in our face and we start riding along. Well, we're used to training together and we've got this pace line going and we're clipping along again at 14, 15, 16 miles an hour. And by that point, everybody's suffering. I mean, it's just hard. And so we're laughing. Every time we come up and pass another rider, we'd say, hop on, get on the ride. I said, Oklahoma's on the way. I said, Boomer Sooner. You said, no, don't mess with Texas. I said, we're messing with you, but hop on, get a ride. Well, some of them, that would animate some of these feisty Texas cowboys, and they'd hop on our pace line and ride with us for a while. Well, anyway, we came up to it's a really cool lookout. You're at the 99-mile mark. I'm thinking, okay, we're going to make it. At 99 miles, you're at the top of this hill. The last mile is downhill, so you just coast to the finish line. Anyway, this Texan guy rides up alongside me, and he had somehow zip tied a boombox to his bicycle. Had little speakers on the handlebars and everything. It was pretty cool. And he said, well, it looks like we're going to make it there, young fella. I'm like 60 years old. I'm not thinking I'm not young at that point. He said, you're going to do the victory lap? I said, the victory lap? What are you talking about? He said, well, this is a pretty big event in this here town. So there's a 3-mile loop that goes through town, and all the town comes up and cheers. And I said, sir, we've just ridden 99 miles. I'll be grateful to God just to finish it. And he pushes play on his little thing, and that Lone Ranger song comes on. Dun-dun, 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 and we start down this hill. And he turns around, laughs at me, and he says, don't let it whoop you. And I thought, well, all right, I'll ride with this guy. So I rode with him for a while, and we did the 3-mile victory lap. And then you come back to the finish line. They've got all these misters. You ride through these misters, and you get wet. It cools you off. It's like, wow. And you took lots of pictures at the finish line. But I turned off my computer, and I realized that I looked at Strava. I'd ridden 102.5 miles in some very extreme situations. To God be the glory. God literally gives strength to the weary. And I want to give God glory for my testimony, raising me up. Anybody who says that God doesn't do miracles, it's too late for me. I've heard it said, and it's worth repeating. A man with an experience is never at the mercy of a man with an argument. So you can argue all day long that was just human will or human effort or whatever. And I say, no, it was not. It was the power of God that gave strength to me when I could not do it. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, not my own strength, but through his strength. And I want the purpose of me going through all this long story is that you might know Jesus and find his strength. Anyway, I love you. I'm going to pray for you. Father, for anybody that's sat through this, now been an hour of me telling my story of how you've healed me and raised me up, I pray for them right now that they would experience an infusion of your strength, vitality, hope, life, and purpose. I believe I receive it now in Jesus' name. Amen. Love you. See you on the next one. Like and subscribe.